So today we're back on the E30, and after the successful rear 5-lug swap, I'm keen to get swiftly on with the front and get it swapped on. Like with the rears, there's actually a few ways to skin a cat when it comes to doing a 5-lug swap on the front of an E30. I believe the way I'm doing it is again the most cost-effective way, and from what I can see on paper there shouldn't really be any compromise. Let's hope it goes together as well as I'm expecting it to. I'm going to show you everything I'm using to do the swap and hopefully show you exactly how it goes together. So stick with me and let's crack on. So the original plan was to work from back to front, restoring the underside of the car, but I'm realising the only sensible way forward with that really is to take the engine out. And of course taking the engine out would kick this 5-lug front swap down the road a long way. So instead I've decided to expedite this and just get it all fitted and see if it actually comes together properly. So first things first, let me show you everything I'm going to be using for the swap. Of course I will also link it all in the description, but let's just go through it piece by piece now. Firstly, we've got HSD Monopro coilovers. These are actually E36 front coilovers, but with the E30 top mount, so I shouldn't have to re-drill the suspension tower on the front. Secondly, I've got E36 front knuckles, and as you can see, I've already fitted brand new brake shields and pressed on new wheel bearings with the standard E36 5-stud hub. These are SRS Concept front control arm bushings, and these are actually a crucial part for this swap to make sure the wheel sits centrally in the arch, which can be a problem without them. Next we've got E36 front calipers. These are just off a 328i, I think they're all the same. You may remember I refinished these in a previous video, and we're also using the standard E36 front disc. And to go with the new calipers, we've got Wesmoto braided lines. These are standard E36 front size. Great quality these, we've used them in a few places. And the final piece of the puzzle is 5-stud wheels. These are style 5s off an E38 7 series, same as I was using on the rear. Hopefully they fit just as well on the front. Right, so with the front wheel off, we can see that there's actually some nasty damage in this wheel arch and also some nasty rust patches as well. I had a feeling the front might be a bit worse than the rear, and that might be coming true, unfortunately. It pains me a bit to be fitting shiny new parts into this nasty old wheel well that needs loads of work, but this really is to just make sure it fits up as I expect, and then it'll all be coming back off again quite soon to fix all this anyway when I pull the engine. I have got a refreshed front subframe that's also reinforced and a refreshed wishbone and all of that stuff, but for today let's just see if we can get this front 5-lug swap done with what we've got. I'm pretty sure the hardest part is going to be taking out the 2 ball joints, because they look like they've been raised from the wreck of the Titanic, to be honest, but let's see what we can do with a bit of persuasion. So I'm going to start by taking out the ball joint for the track rod end. These are notoriously a pain in the arse, unfortunately, so I suspect I'm going to need to use the persuader. I also have a handy ball joint splitter, which will save the day, I suspect. Right, let's see if we can get this to come out now. That should have livened it up a bit. Right, and it's a 17 nut, and we've actually got some access to get the big impact gun on it, so let's start with that and see what happens. The dust shield's already knackered, so I'm not going to worry about that. That's worked too well, that, excellent. So I'm going to thread the nut back on, and that's just going to protect the threads there whilst I hit it with a hammer, which will hopefully push this out and split it. Way. So now I'm going to move on to the bigger one, which is the one that attaches to the front control arm. This is actually a 19 nut, and interesting, it looks in better condition, so maybe it's been replaced before. Hopefully that'll mean it'll come off easier. But I've put a bit of plus gas on it, and I'm going to hit it with a hammer. So getting the impact gun on is going to be a bit more difficult here because of the strut, so I'm just going to shove this brake pad wear sensor out the way that I didn't even know the car had till now. Let's see if I can do it with an old school ratchet. Feels too loose that, hopefully the whole joint isn't spinning. Ah, we're in business. I'm going to move on to using this ball joint splitter. But I'm going to use it. Oops, I'm going to use it in a slightly unorthodox way. Just using this half of it, I'm going to hammer it into this gap, and it should split it like an old school one would. Let's see. That's got it moving that. Excellent, really handy this. I'm not sure that's how you're supposed to use it, but it's very good. Link in description with that. Just going to quickly pop off this wear sensor wiring now, just so that it's not attached to the strut, because that'll be a pain when I come to take the strut out. That'll do it. So now I'm going to try and take off this brake line. It's looking pretty crusty up here, so I think we might have to get lucky. I've got an 11mm brake line spanner, which I'm going to put on this way, and hopefully this top part will lock against the car's body as I'm trying to undo it, which should stop this from twisting and snapping, which is the most likely issue. And I'm going to turn just the bottom one, which is a 14. Cross your fingers. Right, we're about to get covered in brake fluid. Ah, it's going bloody everywhere. Right, jeez. Yeah. So that's the track rod ball joint, the control arm ball joint, the brake line and the pad wear sensor all loosened or removed. So now, theoretically, we should be able to undo these 3 top mount nuts and drop the whole strut down with the caliper and the disc and everything and take the whole thing away in one motion. So that's what I'm going to do now. So now I can take those nuts off the track rod end on the front control arm, hopefully take the whole lot away. Right, so that's that crusty old strut and brakes out the way, which leads us nicely onto these front control arm bushings. As I pointed out earlier in the video, I've got these new front control arm bushings from SRS Concept. And these will correct the caster so the wheel will sit in the correct place in the arch with this conversion. I can see this being a bit of a pain in the ass to do in situ with the control arm on the car, and I think I'm going to have a bit of a time getting this bushing off, but let's see how we go with that. Hopefully I'll get it off and I can get this new one on, and then we can continue. I'm going to start by taking out these two 17-headed bolts. So I'm going to try and swizzle this front control arm so I've got the bushing end poking outwards so I can work on that without being trapped in this corner. So let's see what we can do. Much better. Oh, thank God for that. Well, that was a mission, getting the lollipop bushing off that. It was a good idea that we came up with to twist it off with a bit of plus gas and an extension to increase our leverage. So it could even be reused that if we needed to. Not that I ever will, I don't think. So this is cleaned up nicely. It's supposed to be 20mm exactly to go into that brass bushing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stick a bit of grease over it. And then I'm going to push the bushing on, the new one, and it should go on by hand I think, but it may require a bit of a tap. Lovely. They torque up to 41 Newton meters, these. That's the new front control arm bushing on.
seems like a really quality piece. Fitment's perfect, new hardware was really good, so that was nice and easy. I can definitely see that it's moved this control arm. Now it'll be interesting to see how that translates when the suspension on, but that's exactly what it's supposed to do, so that's what I expected.
So now on to the exciting part for me, because I'm getting to fit these front coilovers. As mentioned earlier, these are HSD Monopro coilovers, and they are E36 struts, but with the E30 top mount with the correct stud spacing, so I don't have to do any modifications to the car. Now at this point, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to install my E36 knuckle onto the strut and then install the whole thing on the car in one go. One thing to note is this is an anti-roll bar link, I believe, and it was on the strut, but to be honest I can't see any use for that on an E30, so that's probably residual from the fact that this is an E36 strut, so I've just removed that for now. The hardware for the knuckle is just the standard E36 hardware, which I've plated. That came out quite reasonably well, so let's get this strut and knuckle fitted together. Having a quick look through the HSD fitting instructions, which is actually quite generic, it says you need to thread in the strut 6 centimeters into this bottom bracket, I guess so that it just makes it all extra solid. So I've done that, so that's set correctly. Now, threading the strut into this bottom bracket is actually what will adjust the ride height. Changing the pressure on this spring with these collars here will only change the preload, not the ride height. But this isn't a video about fitting coilovers correctly. So I'm just setting these to the maximum setting, then I'll compare to the standard struts, and then hopefully we can get straight on with fitting them on the car. Dialing these into the perfect heights is something I'm going to do after the car's back on its feet with an engine in. So looking at the size of this strut, it's actually quite a lot shorter than the standard one, even on its highest setting. The standard one, to about the centre of the axle, is about 61, I'd say. The HSD on the highest setting is about 50. So an 11 centimetre difference on its highest setting. So hopefully that'll be nice and easy to fit, and it should be a bit lower straight away. So with the 3 top studs fastened on, I've now come down to the bottom to try and get the knuckle connected up to the front control arm and the track rod end. Now I can see a bit of an issue straight away in that I can't move this front control arm upwards to meet the hole in the knuckle, and that's because of this ARB. It's just too stiff and it's in the way. I think what needs to happen is I need to get shorter ARB links to work with this shorter suspension setup. That way I can keep the ARB parallel. But for now what I've done is I've just whipped off the nut and I'm just going to shift it out the way so that I can get the knuckle connected, and then we'll go from there. The disc on, and I've just turned the steering wheel just to give me a bit more access to fit this caliper, which is the next job. Just goes on by 2 bolts that are 17mm head. Let's get it on.
fit the braided line, I'm going to do the caliper end first.
I think once the other side is apart, I should be able to get this ARB link to fasten back into the wishbone correctly. But as I mentioned earlier, I think I'm going to need shorter links for the new ride height just to keep this ARB actually parallel. Another thing to note is there are obviously torque specs for all of these fasteners that I'm putting on. But as mentioned, I am going to be taking this back off once I've confirmed that this combination of parts does work, so I can restore the wheel wells and the underside of the car. So the next thing to do now is to get the other side done, brought up to the same level as this side, and then I'll be able to refit the wheel and we can drop the car down and see how it looks. The other side will be mostly the same, if not identical to this side, so I'll just whiz through that off camera now. Getting the ball joints off was also a nightmare on this side, and I had to go into a frenzy with the big hammer again, but we got there in the end. So this is all fitted up on this side too now, which is great news. So the next thing to do is to bleed up the brakes and just check there are no leaks and check the calipers work as I expect. And then we can finally throw the wheels on, put the car on the ground, and see what it actually looks like. Okay, I've just topped the master cylinder up and I'm about to start bleeding the brakes, so let's crack on and see what comes out, see if we can get all the air out of this. Closed.
Open.
Closed. It's very milky on this side.
Already got pressure.
That's good.
Open.
Closed. 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 It's done. So that's the car back on the ground now, and I'm actually really relieved to have done the front 5-lug conversion to match the rear finally, because I've been looking at it for ages with a silly rake and it's just been really bugging me. I'm thrilled with how the car looks on these 16s. It's very OEM plus, which is exactly my style, so I'm quite chuffed with that. And even though these are set on the highest ride height, I'd say for me it's about spot on. I don't want this to be a slammed show car, I want it to be usable and purposeful looking. In reality, there is a little bit more work to do for this swap. The obvious thing that springs to mind straight away is the tracking is out. There's a lot of toe out on these front wheels now. They're kind of facing a little bit the opposite way. To solve that would be fairly straightforward. What I'd need to do would be to screw on the track rod end a little bit more onto the inner tie rod just to shorten the width, and that should bring the front of the wheel in. But of course,
you probably want an alignment shop to do that properly to get it absolutely bang on. There's also the issue that the track rod ends look incredibly rusty, so I didn't really want to get into battle with those straight away. I suspect turning those would be an absolute mission, which is another good reason to ask an alignment shop to do it. Another reason I've decided not to mess with that tie rod is I'm actually planning to do a steering rack swap to a purple tag rack. So I've decided, rather than having that battle, I'll solve it when I've got new parts. So if you found this video helpful, please do give us a like, and don't forget you can check out the full parts list in the description so you can price the swap up for yourself by going on those links. I think my next plan is to actually start thinking about pulling the M40 engine from this car so I can finish restoring the underside, at which point all the suspension will come back off. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on that. So I'll just leave you with a final note about wheel fitment. I'd say these E38 Style 5 wheels, which are ET23 offset, are about fender flush with completely unflared standard fenders, and they're about perfect. I'm really happy with that. That's what I'd go for. Another point to make is the position of the wheel in the arch, which is a common problem when you're doing a front 5 lug swap, is completely solved by that SRS Concepts front wishbone bushing. That's doing its job perfectly as well. So I'm actually really pleased with how that's come together. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.